Everybody, today Honey is going to continue reading Wayside School Beneath the Cloud of Doom, written by Louis Shacker and illustrated by Tim Holtz. Chapter 27 Kachuka Boop. The ultimate test was over, and nobody was sent back to kindergarten. Mrs. Jules had made up the test so that every one of her students had a chance to shine, using his or her special talent. Anyone with a nail clipping? She asked. Marion came with the front of the room and dropped 37 clippings into the nail bucket. 19 came from toes and 18 from fingers. He started to do the math on the board. 999,000 plus 962 plus 37 is 9. He was suddenly startled by a very loud kajuka boop. He dropped the chalk. This was a bell nobody in the class had ever heard before, not even Mrs. Jules. Then came another kajuka, followed by 2 boops. What do you mean, Mrs. Jules? Shouted Leslie. Everybody keep calm, said Mrs. Jules. Kajuka boop, boop, boop. Mrs. Jules hurried to the back closet. He started up again. Kajuka boop, kachuka boop, boop. Mrs. Jules threw opened the closet door and started tossing books and supplies out of the way. Kachuka boop, boop, boop. She finally removed a very large book covered with dust. The Complete Guide to Bells, said Terence, reading the book's title over Mrs. Jules' shoulder. Mrs. Jules sat on the floor, turning the pages until she got the index. The kachuka booping continued, making it difficult for her to concentrate. She found it, kachuka boop, page 297. She quickly turned to the page. Suddenly a loud boom shook the classroom. The lights went out. This time nobody screamed. They were too scared. Mrs. Jules lit a candle. In the flickering light, she read aloud the page 297. If you hear a kajuka followed by 1, 2, and then 3 boops, you should. She stopped and blew a cloud of dust off the page, then tried to find where she had left off. 1, 2, and then 3 boops. You should run for your life. A cloud of doom is about to destroy everything. She dropped the book. Everybody outside, she ordered. Another boom shook the classroom so hard that the clock fell off the wall. The children ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The paper-clip closet must have fallen over, said Damien. It's blocking the door. Paper-clip closet? said Miss Jules. She glared at Jason. Sorry, he said. Jason couldn't keep a secret. Todd, Marithia, Damien, and Allison all pushed together, but the door wouldn't budge. Let Stephen in there, urged Kathy. He's been doing all those push-downs. With Stephen's help, they pushed the door open. Sirens wailed from the closet, which lay on the ground. A smoke screen filled the area. In the light of Mrs. Julie's candle, they could see the chains that still were had been shattered. Paper clips were strewn all over the floor. Benjamin and Rondi started picking them up. Leave them, shouted Mrs. Jules. Now they knew it was serious. Mrs. Jules told everyone to hold hands as she led the way down the staircase. Paul grabbed Leslie's pigtails. What are you doing? She demanded. It's either that or your hand, he said. Okay then, Leslie agreed. The kajuka booping continued as more loud booms shook the school. A gust of wind blew out of Mrs. Jules's candle, and the class continued down in darkness. Joe sat on a skateboard, which somebody had left on the middle of the stairs. He fell, pulling John down with him. Who pulled down Dana? Who pulled down Jenny? Who pulled down Rondi? Who pulled down Terence? The chain reaction ended with Damien pulling down Mrs. Jules. The class lights rolled across the stairs as the school shook around them. We're doomed, Meg wailed. Look, exclaimed Bibi. A door had opened, and there was light coming from inside the classroom. A teacher stood in the doorway. Quick, come inside, she beckoned. You'll be safe here. She had a long fingernail on her pinky. Chapter 28. The teacher with the long fingernail. Like moths, the children ran to the light. Welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. Come in, the woman said as she filed past and joined the other kids in the class. I'm sorry we don't have enough desks, but we'll make do. Please find a place on the floor for now. The children did as they were told. They felt safe, even if a bit uncomfortable. They could no longer feel the school shake or hear the conjugal boop. Miss Zerbs, said Mr. Jules. It's so good to see you. How long has it been? Feels like forever, said Miss Zerbs. I've never bumped into you in the teacher's lounge, said Mrs. Jules. We must just keep missing each other. I try not to bump into people, said Miss Zerbs. Miss Zerbs was tall and thin. Her skirt and blouse were neat and trim. Her short hair looked shiny and silky and smelled like strawberry shampoo. Everybody about her was neat and orderly, except for that one fingernail. And how's Mavis? said Miss Zerbs. Mavis was Mrs. Jules's daughter. Adorable, said Mrs. Jules. But they grew up so fast, don't they? I wouldn't know, said Miss Zerbs. You don't look your age the days. Said Mrs. Jules. Very nice of you to say, said Miss Zerbs. Mrs. Jules wasn't just being nice. Miss Zerbs hadn't changed one bit, except for her fingernail, of course, which had grown considerably longer. Calvin walked between the two teachers. Excuse me, Miss Zerbs, he said. I think I'm supposed to give you this. He handed Miss Zerbs a folded piece of paper that was so old it tore as Miss Zerbs unfolded it. She strained to read the faded writing. Oh, okay, she said to Miss Zerbs, then dropped the note in the trash. Is that the note I gave you to give Miss Zerbs? Said Mrs. Jules, asked Calvin. Calvin shrugged. I just found it in my pocket, he said, sounding even more surprised than Mrs. Jules. Mrs. Jules stared at him. You told me you gave it to her, she accused. I don't think I ever said that, said Calvin. Miss Jules continued to stare as she returned to her seat on the floor. We're just about to have our history review, said Miss Zerbs. Who's your best history student? Myron, Miss Zerbs answered without hesitation. Myron had gotten the highest score on the history portion of the ultimate test. Myron, stand up, please, said Miss Zerbs. He stood. What kind of shoes did Mary Bobkins like to wear? Miss Zerbs asked him. Who? Asked Myron. The kids from Miss Zerbs' class giggled. No laughing, said Miss Zerbs. We don't laugh at stupid people. Don't feel bad, Myron. You may be stupid now, but once you've been in my class for a few years, you'll know the history of everybody. Mark, would you please tell Myron the answer? A few years? Myron asked, but Miss Zerbs ignored the question. Mark Miller stood up. Which Mary Balkins do you mean? He asked. The one born in 1801 in Boston, or the one born in 1954 in San Francisco? Boston, said Miss Zerbs. Red Butch, said Mark. Excellent, said Miss Zerbs. Who's Mary Balkins? Said Mrs. Jules. Was she famous? Why? Asked Miss Zerbs. Does your class only study famous people? Do you think famous people are more important than people who aren't famous? But there isn't enough time to study everyone, said Mrs. Jules. We don't play favorites in my class, said Miss Zerbs. She went to the back closet and took out several giant stacks of papers. This is everyone born in 1837. She went around the room, handing each student a stack of 100 pages or more. When you finish studying a page, please pass it on to someone else. Myron stared helplessly at his stack. I can't even read this, he complained. I think it's Chinese. Well, yes, a lot of people were born in China, said Miss Zerbs. She handed Myron a Chinese dictionary and said, You'll need this. It is impossible to say how long Myron sat there, fumbling through the dictionary as the kids around him was passing around their sheets of paper. We might have been there an hour, or a day, or a week. Time passes slowly when you're trying to read a Chinese dictionary, even if you're Chinese. He glanced up and spotted a pair of scissors on Mark Miller's desk. He got an idea. Hey, Mark, can I borrow this for a sec? Myron asked. Sure, said Mark. Myron took the scissors, then walked bravely in the front of the room. He didn't know if his plan would work. In fact, it really didn't make any sense, but it was his only HOPE. Excuse me, Miss Zerd, I can trim your fingernail for you if you like, he offered. My fingernail? Asked Miss Zerd, astonished by such a suggestion. Which one? The long one on the end, said Myron. Miss Zerd looked at her hand. Now that you mention it, it had gotten long. I guess I hadn't noticed because it grew so slowly. She held out her hand. Myron pressed hard on the scissors and snipped it off. That does feel better, said Miss Sears. Thank you, Myron. Myron had the fingernail up in the air, except he was no longer standing on the front of the classroom. He was standing on the stairs, and everybody else from Mrs. Jules's class lay sprawled across the staircase. A million! He shouted triumphantly. Chapter 29. After the storm, the boofs and booms had stopped, but the lights were black gone. Myron and the others had to step all sorts of objects as they made their way back towards their classroom. The stairs were strewn with books, papers, cafeteria trays, musical instruments, an air pump, a giant stuffed walrus, and even a bust of Sigmund Freud. Between the 26th and 27th floors, the stairs were completely blocked off from Mr. Kitchwater's enormous desk. They all had fun climbing over it, including Mrs. Jules. Once back in class, Myron dropped Miss Zerv's fingernail into the bucket, which unfortunately was empty. Sadly, the other 900,999 clippings were gone. Myron would have written 101 million on the blackboard anyway, but there was no blackboard. The chalk was there, however. It was as if everything inside Wayside School had been shuffled like a deck of cards and dumped randomly to every floor. Mrs. Jules' blackboard was eventually discovered in the library. Fingernails and toenails would continue to be found on years to come, sometimes in very strange places. The sun shined. The sky was as blue as Allison's eyes. Birds chirped as they flew about. There had been no birds during the dark days of doom. Louis, the art teacher, shoveled off snow off the roof. Among other things, the cloud had dumped huge amounts of snow. The playground sparkled white. Louis had to keep careful. The snow was packed high above the guardrails and was very slippery. Look out below! He shouted as he tossed a shovelful of snow over the edge. Down below, the kids were playing a kind of reverse dodgeball. It was the boys against the girls. Every time Louis shouted, "Look out below!" they did the opposite. Eric Evans charged past Jenny and dived face first, sliding across the snow-face-covered ground. Louis's club smacked him right on the head. 1 point! He exclaimed. Recess was 3 hours today. The kids had been sent out to play, while the teachers were stuck with cleaning up the mess made by the storm. Just as Mrs. Jules had predicted, now that the cloud of doom was gone, the world had become a happier place. The only thing missing was a rainbow. Look out below! Louis called from the other side of the school. They raced around the building. Leslie dived through the falling clump. 1 point, she declared. No way, Miss Pigtails, said Terence. It missed you. Did not, Leslie insisted. See, look at all my snow in my hair. Touch the ground snow, urged Terence. Dana came to Leslie's defense. Some of it came from the ground, she agreed, but 4 flakes came from the air. I saw them. How can you see 4 snowflakes? Asked Paul. Super glasses, said Dana, pointing to her spectacles. She picked 4 snowflakes out of Leslie's hair. 1, 2, 3, 4, just like I told you. That proves it, declared Bibi. 1 point. Paul scowled. He remained the spectacle of her spectacles. Up on the roof, Louis spotted something sticking out of the snow. It was purple and green, with some yellow dots. He tried to pull it free, but it was stuck. He pulled hard. It wouldn't budge. He gave it a hard yank. The umbrella jerked free, but Louis's fist slipped out from under him. He fell on the bottom and slid backwards across the roof. Look out below! He shouted as he went over the ledge. The children ran to the call. They were quite surprised when they looked up and saw the yard teacher coming towards them. Louis looked down. He didn't want to hurt the children. He considered trying a Mary Poppins, but he was holding the wrong end of the umbrella, and there wasn't time to change his grip and try to open it. His best chance was to grab the top of the flagpole. Wayside School had an extra tall flagpole, so he wouldn't look puny next to the building. Louis reached out for it but missed. The next thing he knew, he was spinning wildly in circles. The curved handle of the umbrella had swooped the pole. Louis roared dizzily around it as he slowly moved the pole. By the time he reached the ground, he must have circled the flagpole more than 1,000 times. Sherry ran to him. To Louis, it looked like there were 6 Sherrys, all spinning like tops. "Thanks, Louis, you're the best," said Sherry, taking her umbrella. "But really, there was no big rush. You could have just used the stairs." Chapter 30. The Rainbow. There was no stove in cafeteria kitchen. An enormous pot hung from a thick chain above the blazing fire. "Lower the pot," ordered Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperetta turned the squeaky crank and the pot came down. "What will be today?" he asked. "Shh," said Mr. Mush. Mr. Pepperetta knew better. He must never interrupt a great artist during a moment of inspiration. He Miss Mush's eyes were closed. She rubbed her chin. She wanted to make something truly special after the storm of doom. "Rainbow stew," she declared as she raised her wooden spoon high above her head. "Brilliant!" agreed Mr. Pepperetta. "What do you have that's red?" said Miss Mush. Mr. Pepperetta looked over the inventory list. "Red cabbage," he said, "beet, strawberries, and peppers." Miss Mush waved the wooden spoon and said, "Toss them into the pot." Flames shot up as Mr. Pepperetta threw the ingredient. He had to shield his eyes from the smoke. "What about yellow?" said Miss Mush. "Yellow squash, bananas, yellow peppers, yellow onions." "Start with the bananas," said Miss Mush, "and then we'll see about the onions." Mr. Pepperetta started to peel a banana, but Miss Mush stopped him. "The peel is the part that's yellow," she reminded him. "If I wanted white, I would ask for peeled bananas." "Sorry," said Mr. Pepper. He tossed 57 bushels of bananas, and peels and all, into the pot. There was a loud hissing noise as steam filled the room. Some cooks consider things like taste or perhaps nutrition. When some preparing a meal for rainbow stew, color was all that mattered. Miss Mush stirred the pot with a large stick. "Perhaps a little black now for definition," she said. Mr. Pepper read from the list. "Poppy seeds, burnt toast, my shoes." High above them, in Mrs. Josie's class, several children had their noses. "What's that smell?" said Calvin. "Miss Mush must be cooking something," said Phoebe. "It smells like shoes," said Myron. DJ sniffed. "Black shoes," he said, with hard soles and no laces. "You can smell the laces?" asked Kathy. "No," said DJ. "I just told you there weren't any laces." Mr. Kidwater's voice came over the speaker. "Good morning, students. It's another great day here." There was a sound of paper rustling. "Wayside School. For lunch today, Miss Mush will be serving rainbow stew. It will be the greatest lunch ever." 15 floors beneath them, Miss Mush felt her stomach tighten. She too heard Mr. Kidwater's morning announcement. Now the pressure was on. She climbed the ladder and stared down into the bubbling pot. Her face was covered with soot and sweat. "Something orange," she declared. "How about oranges?" suggested Mr. Pepperetta. "Too obvious," said Miss Mush. "Carrot, I suppose," said Miss Mush, although carrot didn't feel right to her. Instructions struck. 18 pumpkins," she declared. Each pumpkin made a giant splash, and Miss Mush and Mr. Pepperetta took turns tossing them into the pot. After all the pumpkins were added to the stew, a tiny smile cracked Miss Mush's face. It was a smile that all great artists knew well. After years of self-doubt, she started to believe that she was on the verge of creating something truly wonderful. But it was just a quick smile, then back to work. The Dutch always returned. After a lunch bell boinged and the children descended upon the cafeteria. "Rainbow stew," said Benjamin. "It sounds like it could be good." "Don't let the name fool you," warned Toad. "The better the name, the worse it tastes." "Remember when she made midnight madness?" asked Bo. "Don't even say," snapped loudly. "I was all up night, running around in circles." Miss Mush and Mr. Pepperetta stood shoulder to shoulder as the children lined up. They had finished the stew only moments before. "I hope they like it," Miss Mush whispered. "They will," said Mr. Pepperetta assured her. He wore short pants, black socks, and no shoes. Miss Mush hoped he was right, but all her doubts had returned. Her apron was touched with lots of bright colors, but the rain was still like a lumpy grayish brown mud. She didn't understand it. What happened to all the colors? Mauricia reached the front of the line. Miss Mush swooped some rainbow stew into a bowl and handed it to her. Thank you, Miss Mush, said Mauricia, always polite. Sorry, it was supposed to be a bit more colorful, exclaimed Miss Mush. I didn't know what would go wrong. Joy was next. Sorry, said Miss Mush again as she handed a bowl to Joy. Sorry, Ron, she said. Sorry, Dee Dee. Sorry, Joe. Sorry, John. Sorry. Allison and Rondi sat on the end of the long table. Are you going to eat it? Rondi asked Allison. I have a tangerine in my pocket, said Allison. Maybe I'll just eat that. Rondi watched as Allison slowly removed the entire peel in just one piece. Dee Dee counted the points on her fork. DJ swallowed the plastic fork off through the gray muck. Well, here goes, he announced. He poked the fork into something solid. It could have been a vegetable or maybe a piece of meat or perhaps a pair of shoes. He lowered his foot. Maybe later, he said. Look delicious, Kathy said enthusiastically. She took a big spoonful, spread it to her mouth, and swallowed. Yummy, she declared. The other kids couldn't be sure. They could never tell anymore that when Kathy was speaking in opposites. Calvin stabbed something gluey on her fork. He brought it to his mouth, chewed a while, then chewed some more. Well, Calvin wasn't sure how to describe it. Red, he said at last. Red? questioned Allison. That's a color, not a taste. And blue, said Calvin. Ronnie took a bite. She chewed a while. Purple, she declared. I taste yellow, said Todd. Dana swallowed. Pink, she exclaimed. John finished chewing, then swallowed. Kind of blue-green, he said. It's delicious, said Shuri. Purple and green with yellow polka dots. They were more chewed and more colors they tasted. That's silly, said Allison. She took a bite. Her eyes shone. She tasted orange, with green and purple stripes and a black outline. Do you like it? asked Ronnie. Only the best lunch ever, said Allison. Mr. Pepper grabbed and shook Miss Mush's arm. They like it, he said excitedly. Look at them. They really like it. Miss Mush didn't say a word. A tear rolled down her sweaty and fluted cheek. Did you write down the recipe? He asked. Miss Mush shook her head. There is no recipe, she whispered. No two rainbows are ever the same. She gazed out across the lunchroom. This was all she ever wanted. Everybody chewed. The end.